The rancher lived alone for 8 years, until an Apache woman asked for warmth in his arms. Daniel had lived on the ranch for as long as he could remember, or, more precisely, for as long as he had chosen to remember himself in this quiet, isolated life. The ranch sat on the edge of a wide, rolling valley in Arizona, where the hills stretched for miles, meeting the sky in shades of gold and orange at sunrise. The land was beautiful, wild, and unforgiving all at once. Daniel had once shared this place with others, family, friends, laughter, but that was a lifetime ago. 8 years had passed since he had chosen solitude, and in that time the ranch had become more than just a home. It had become his companion, his refuge, and, at times, his prison. The mornings were always early. Daniel would rise just before the first light of dawn, when the air was crisp, and the world felt untouched by human hands. He would wrap himself in a thick, worn jacket and step outside, feeling the cold bite at his cheeks. The smell of damp earth and grass filled his lungs as he walked toward the barn. His horses were waiting, their breaths forming small clouds in the chilly air. They nickered softly when they saw him, recognizing the routine that had continued without interruption for years. Daniel would feed them, brushing their coats with steady hands, each movement calm and deliberate. In the rhythm of these simple chores, he found a strange comfort. The cattle were next. He would wander among the herds, checking for any signs of illness or injury. He knew each one by sight and name, as if they were family members in a world where he had chosen to have none. Daniel talked to them quietly, not because he needed to, but because the sound of another voice, even his own, brought a sense of life to the empty ranch. The hills echoed back faintly, a reminder that the land itself listened, even if no human did. Some days he would pause on a ridge and look out across the valley, watching the sun slowly rise, painting the sky in pinks and purples. He would take a deep breath, letting the quiet fill him, and sometimes in these rare moments he allowed himself to feel the weight of loneliness pressing gently against him. Evenings were harder. The sun would dip behind the hills, leaving long shadows across the fields. Daniel would light a fire in the stone fireplace of his cabin and sit in the chair by the hearth. The crackle and warmth of the flames were comforting, but they also reminded him of the silence that surrounded him. 8 years of quiet had made him both stronger and more fragile. He had learned to enjoy his own company, to find joy in the smallest details, the first crocus of spring, the way snow settled on the hills, the smell of fresh hay. Yet sometimes, when the wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the scent of distant rain or wildflowers, he felt a pang in his chest, a reminder that human connection was missing from his life. Daniel's solitude was not always by choice, though he had made peace with it. Early in his life, he had lost people he loved. Family members had moved on, some to distant cities, others to lives he could no longer follow. Friends had drifted away, pursuing paths that did not include a life on this isolated ranch. And then there had been a love, brief, powerful, and ultimately heartbreaking, that had left scars too deep to ignore. Each memory of that time was like a shadow he carried, always present but never fully visible. It was easier, he thought, to live alone than to risk that kind of pain again. So he chose the ranch, the animals, and the land. They asked for little, gave more in return, and never left. Despite the peace he found in routine, Daniel was not without dreams. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the window and look at the stars stretching endlessly across the sky. He would imagine what it would be like to have someone share this life with him, not just the easy days, but the hard ones too. He would picture laughter in the kitchen, shared meals, and evenings by the fire with another warm presence. But these thoughts were fleeting, like clouds drifting across the moon. He pushed them away, telling himself that solitude was safety, that it protected him from loss and disappointment. Yet deep down, he could not deny a quiet longing for companionship. The land itself had a way of reminding him of his isolation. The desert winds could be harsh, storms sudden and terrifying, and in the midst of these challenges, Daniel realized how alone he truly was. He had learned to navigate the terrain, to read the signs of weather, to anticipate danger, and to survive. Every hardship strengthened his resolve, yet every hardship also reminded him of the fragility of life. The ranch required vigilance, patience, and resilience, and Daniel gave all of himself to meet its demands. Yet there were nights when he would sit by the fire, looking at the empty spaces around him, and feel a deep ache for someone who might fill them, not with words or entertainment, but with simple presence. Daniel's friends, when he had any, had long stopped visiting. The world outside his valley seemed distant and unreachable. Letters were rare and phone calls even rarer. The isolation was total, yet it was familiar. He had learned to enjoy the little things, baking bread, mending clothes, repairing tools, or simply sitting on the porch and watching the sun set. Each task, each moment, was a meditation in patience and attention. The land gave him a sense of purpose, and that purpose became a substitute for human companionship. Still, the heart is not so easily satisfied, and Daniel sometimes caught himself listening for footsteps that would never come, imagining voices in the wind, or wondering if the distant hills might one day bring a traveler to his doorstep. Animals were his closest companions. The horses he fed each morning, the cattle he guided through the fields, even the stray dog that had appeared one winter and refused to leave. They became his friends, his confidants, his family. Daniel often spoke to them, telling stories of his youth, of the life he once had, of dreams he dared not share with anyone else. In return, the animals gave him their loyalty, their gentle companionship, and their quiet understanding. There was comfort in their presence, but there was no replacement for human warmth, for shared laughter, or for the simple touch of another hand. The ranch itself was a character in his life. The creaking of the old wooden floors, the smell of hay and earth, the way the wind whispered through the trees, all of it was familiar and constant. Daniel had repaired every fence, patched every roof, and built everything he needed with his own hands. There was pride in his work, satisfaction in his accomplishments, but also a shadow of melancholy. The ranch was thriving, yet it could not comfort the empty nights, nor fill the spaces left by absence. He had created a home, yes, but it was a home without laughter, without shared meals, without the warmth of another human being beside him. Yet even in his solitude, Daniel's heart was not entirely closed. He was aware of the beauty around him, the delicate bloom of desert flowers, the flight of hawks over the canyon, the changing colors of the hills with each season. He allowed himself to marvel at these things, to feel joy in small moments, to experience peace in nature's rhythm. In these moments, he was reminded that life had more to offer, that connection, beauty, and love were possible, even if they seemed distant or unlikely. As the sun set over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, Daniel would often sit by the fire, reflecting on the day. He would think about the work he had completed, the animals he had tended, and the quiet moments of beauty he had witnessed. And sometimes, just sometimes, he would imagine a knock at the door, a stranger appearing from the hills, a voice asking for shelter, warmth, or friendship. He would shake his head, telling himself it was foolish, yet the thought lingered, a faint spark in the otherwise steady rhythm of his solitary life. For 8 years, Daniel had lived like this, quiet, disciplined, and alone. He had built walls around his heart, believing that solitude was safety, that isolation was strength. Yet the land, the animals, and even the quiet nights reminded him of what he had lost and what he still secretly desired. His life was one of routine, of hard work, and of quiet moments of reflection. And in that stillness, in the rhythm of labor and the whisper of the wind across the hills, a small, persistent hope began to take root. Hope that one day, the quiet might be broken, not by disaster, but by connection, by another human heart seeking warmth in the same vast, lonely world. The morning started as any other, with the crisp chill of the desert air brushing Daniel's face as he stepped outside. The sun was just beginning to peek over the hills, painting the sky with shades of gold and pale pink. He moved toward the barn, humming softly to himself, his hands busy with feeding the horses and arranging the hay. Yet this morning held something different, a sense of expectation he could not quite name. As Daniel repaired a broken fence near the creek that ran along the edge of his property, he noticed a movement in the distance. At first he thought it was a deer or some other wild animal common in the area, but as the figure drew closer he realized it was a person, a woman, walking carefully across the uneven terrain. She was slender, her dark hair flowing behind her, eyes cautious but alert. There was a grace in the way she moved, yet a wariness that spoke of someone used to being on their own. Daniel felt a strange mix of curiosity and hesitation. He had not seen another human in months, and suddenly, here was someone approaching his solitary world. The woman stopped a short distance from him. Her eyes, dark and steady, met his. "Hello," she said softly, her voice carrying across the morning air. Daniel's first instinct was to stay silent, to observe, but the warmth in her tone made him reply. "Hello," he said cautiously. "Can I help you?" She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and shyness. I'm looking for some shelter," she said. "I've been traveling and the night was cold. I wondered if you might allow me to rest." Daniel studied her carefully. She did not appear threatening, and there was an honesty in her gaze he could not ignore. Still, he had lived alone for so long that trust did not come easily. "This is a private ranch," he said slowly. "I'm not used to visitors." "I understand," she replied, her tone respectful. "I only ask for warmth and a place to stay for a night. I am careful, and I do not want trouble." Her voice had a quiet strength, and Daniel found himself considering her words. He had lived on this land for 8 years, seeing no one. Perhaps it was time to let someone in, even just for a night. "All right," he said finally. "You can stay, but you must follow the rules of the ranch." Her relief was immediate. "Thank you," she said, bowing her head slightly. "I am Ayana." Daniel nodded. "Daniel," he said, still cautious but willing to extend this small act of kindness. The day passed slowly. Daniel showed Ayana the cabin, the barn, and the creek where he drew water. She moved quietly, her presence respectful, yet her eyes were filled with curiosity. She asked about the land, the animals, and the routines Daniel followed. There was an intelligence in her questions, a desire to understand rather than judge. Daniel, who had spent so many years speaking only to animals and the wind, found himself talking to her. He told her about the horses, about the cattle, and about the harshness of the winters. He spoke honestly, without embellishment, and she listened with patience. As the sun rose higher, Yana helped with chores. She carried hay, fed the animals, and even tried her hand at mending a fence. Daniel watched her, impressed by her skill and determination. It was clear she had grown up close to the land, learning how to survive and thrive in the wilderness. Her hands were strong, her movements precise, and there was a quiet dignity in the way she approached each task. Daniel realized that she was not just a traveler seeking shelter. She was someone who understood the rhythm of the land, who could endure its challenges, and who, in her own way, belonged here. During a brief pause, Daniel offered her a simple lunch. They sat outside on a fallen log, the warmth of the sun on their faces. Iana spoke of her travels, the places she had seen, and the challenges she had faced. She shared stories of her people, the Apache traditions that had shaped her, and the lessons she had learned from a life of resilience. Daniel listened intently, fascinated by her strength and the way she carried herself. There was a quiet wisdom in her words, a clarity that made him reflect on his own choices and the years he had spent in solitude. The afternoon passed with more work and conversation. Daniel showed her the creek where he sometimes fished, and they collected water together for the animals. Iana laughed when a fish slipped from her hands, and Daniel found himself smiling genuinely, a sound he had not made in years. There was a lightness in her presence, a sense of connection that he had forgotten existed. For the first time in a long while, he felt the possibility of companionship, not just for comfort but as a sharing of life itself. As evening approached, the air grew colder. Daniel built a fire outside and they sat together, warming their hands by the flames. Iana told stories of her childhood, of nights spent under the stars, of lessons learned from elders, and of songs that carried wisdom across generations. Daniel found himself captivated. He realized that this woman, who had appeared from nowhere, was opening his world in ways he had not anticipated. He listened not only to her words but to the rhythm of her presence, the gentle way she moved, the thoughtful pauses between sentences. Night fell, and the stars emerged in a brilliant display across the sky. Daniel offered her a place inside the cabin to sleep, and she accepted graciously. For the first time in years, he felt the presence of another person in his home, not an intruder but a guest, a fellow traveler in life. They spoke briefly before sleep, sharing thoughts about the day, about the work, about the quiet beauty of the land around them. Daniel realized that the loneliness that had been a constant companion for 8 years was no longer absolute. Iana's presence was like a soft light breaking through the long shadows of solitude. Throughout the night, Daniel noticed small details about her that he had not expected to notice. The way she moved quietly, respecting the space of the cabin. The warmth of her voice, even when she spoke softly. The steadiness of her gaze, which did not demand attention but invited it. These details, subtle as they were, began to create a sense of trust, a bond that was fragile yet real. Daniel knew that the path ahead would require patience and understanding, both for himself and for her, but he felt a hope he had not allowed himself in years. The following morning, Daniel woke to find Iana already outside, tending to the animals. She had taken the initiative without being asked, showing a quiet determination that impressed him. He realized that she was not simply seeking refuge. She was willing to work, to contribute, to share in the life of the ranch. This recognition deepened his respect for her, and a new layer of connection began to form. It was no longer just about providing shelter. It was about shared effort, mutual understanding, and the beginnings of trust. As they worked together through the morning, Daniel noticed the ease with which they moved side by side. There was no awkwardness, no need for forced conversation. They communicated through gestures, shared tasks, and occasional glances. The land, once a symbol of solitude, now became a backdrop for connection. The ranch, the animals, the chores, all were shared experiences that allowed a bond to grow naturally. Daniel found himself laughing at her quick wit, admiring her strength, and appreciating the way she approached life with both caution and courage. By midday, the sun was high, and the warmth of the day brought a sense of calm. Daniel and Iana sat by the creek, resting and watching the water flow over the rocks. The gentle sound of the stream, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the distant call of birds created a peaceful atmosphere. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Daniel realized that this was a new kind of companionship, one that did not require constant words or explanations, but thrived in shared presence and quiet attention. As evening approached once again, Daniel felt a sense of anticipation. The ranch, which had always been a place of work and solitude, was transforming. The fire they built together that night seemed brighter, warmer, and more welcoming. Iana shared stories of her people, of ceremonies and traditions, of values passed down through generations. Daniel listened, feeling a connection not only to her but to the history and culture she represented. It was a bridge between worlds, a reminder that human connection could take many forms and that trust, once offered, could lead to profound understanding. By the end of the second day, Daniel knew that this encounter was more than a chance meeting. Yana had brought a new energy to the ranch, a presence that challenged his routine yet enriched it. He felt the first stirrings of something he had long denied himself, the possibility of friendship, of shared life, of connection beyond the work of the land. And though he was cautious, aware of the years he had spent in solitude and the walls he had built around his heart, he also felt a quiet excitement. Something had begun, delicate and uncertain, yet full of promise. As the stars filled the sky once more, Daniel and Ayanna sat together, their conversation soft, their laughter gentle. The ranch, which had been silent for so long, was alive with the sound of two hearts cautiously opening to one another. And for the first time in 8 years, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future where solitude was no longer the only companion, where warmth and trust could exist alongside the quiet beauty of the land he loved. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel different. The silence that had once defined Daniel's life was gradually being replaced by the soft sounds of conversation, laughter, and shared effort. Ayanna stayed longer than the night she had first asked for shelter. She moved naturally into the rhythm of the ranch, learning its ways while sharing her own skills and knowledge. Daniel, who had been alone for 8 long years, found the presence of another person both comforting and unsettling. He realized that life with someone else required more than kindness. It demanded patience, trust, and understanding, qualities he had not exercised for a long time. Mornings were no longer just his own. Daniel would rise before dawn and Ayanna would already be awake, tending to the animals or preparing breakfast. Together, they would feed the horses, check the fences, and care for the cattle. Ayanna had a gentle touch with the animals, speaking softly as she worked. Daniel noticed how they responded to her presence, calm and trusting. He found himself watching her more often than he admitted to himself. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience shaped by her experiences, and a warmth that seemed to melt the edges of his long-held solitude. At first, their conversations were cautious, limited to practical matters, the work of the ranch, the weather, or the animals. But gradually, they began to share more personal stories. Yana spoke of her childhood among the Apache people, of traditions and lessons passed down from elders, of a life filled with connection to the land and community. Daniel listened intently, fascinated by her words, the cadence of her speech, and the depth of her understanding. In return, he told her about the ranch, about the years he had spent alone, about the struggles and small victories of daily life. The more they spoke, the more Daniel realized that he was not just talking to a visitor. He was sharing his world with someone who truly cared to understand it. Evenings became a cherished time for both of them. After the work was done, they would sit by the fire, the glow of the flames casting long shadows across the cabin. Sometimes they spoke softly, exchanging stories and observations. Other times they sat in companionable silence, letting the warmth of the fire and the presence of each other fill the room. Daniel began to notice subtle changes in himself. The tightness in his chest, a residue of years spent in solitude, was easing. He laughed more freely, smiled more often, and allowed himself to feel emotions he had long suppressed. Their bond grew not just through words but through shared experiences. Yana helped him repair fences that had long needed attention, mend tools, and prepare meals. She showed ingenuity and care in every task, and Daniel admired her abilities. In turn, he taught her small skills unique to his life on the ranch, explaining how to read the weather, care for specific animals, and manage the land during harsh conditions. Together they discovered a rhythm, a flow of work and conversation, of laughter and quiet moments, of cooperation and mutual respect. The ranch, once a solitary and silent place, had become a space of partnership, where two lives intertwined with care and purpose. Despite the growing connection, Daniel was aware of the fragility of their situation. Trust was not easily given after years of solitude, and Ayanna had her own experiences that made her cautious. There were moments when misunderstandings arose, when his bluntness or her hesitation caused tension. Yet each challenge became an opportunity to learn about one another. They navigated these moments with patience, sometimes through gentle conversation, other times through actions that spoke louder than words. Slowly, they learned to understand not only each other's strengths, but also the fears and vulnerabilities that lay beneath the surface. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in from the hills. The wind howled, and the sky darkened with heavy clouds. Daniel and Ayanna worked together to secure the animals and reinforce the fences. The rain began to pour, soaking them to the skin, and for a moment they laughed at the absurdity of their situation. There was exhilaration in facing the storm side by side, a reminder that challenges were easier when shared. That night, as they warmed themselves by the fire, the rain tapping against the roof, Daniel felt a sense of closeness he had not experienced in years. Ayanna's presence was no longer a novelty. It had become a source of comfort, strength, and quiet joy. Over the following weeks, they began to share small routines that brought them closer. Ayanna would prepare simple breakfasts while Daniel tended to the animals. They would work together in the fields, pause for water or conversation, and sometimes just sit on the porch, watching the sun rise or set. Daniel found himself noticing the details, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of her people, the small acts of care she showed for the animals and the land. These details, once invisible to him in the solitude of his own life, became a source of wonder and admiration. Daniel also began to share more of his past with Ayanna. He spoke of the family he had lost, the friends who had drifted away, and the love he had once known. Ayanna listened without judgment, offering empathy and understanding. She shared her own stories of loss and hardship, of times when she had been forced to rely solely on herself, and of moments when kindness from strangers had changed her path. In these exchanges, they discovered not only trust but a sense of kinship, a recognition that despite different experiences, they understood one another in ways that few could. Evenings were no longer just a time to rest, but a time to connect. They cooked together, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing stories or laughter. The fire became a symbol of their growing bond, a place where warmth was shared not just physically but emotionally. Daniel realized that he had allowed his heart to grow quiet not because he wanted to, but because fear had kept him from reaching out. Ayanna's presence challenged that fear gently, reminding him that human connection, while sometimes risky, could also be deeply fulfilling. There were also moments of quiet contemplation. They would sit by the creek, watching the water flow over the rocks, feeling the breeze on their faces, listening to the soft rustle of the trees. In these moments, words were unnecessary. They shared the experience of life itself, the simplicity of nature, the beauty of the land, the steady rhythm of survival and care. Daniel began to understand that connection was not just about conversation or physical presence, but about shared attention, shared effort, and shared appreciation for the world around them. As the days continued, Daniel noticed changes within himself. He laughed more easily, felt joy in small things, and no longer dreaded the silence of the night. He began to imagine a future where life was not lived in isolation, where companionship could bring richness and warmth to even the most challenging days. Ayanna's influence was subtle but profound. She did not demand change. She inspired it through her presence, her actions, and her unwavering respect for him and the life he had built. At the same time, Daniel remained aware that building a deeper bond required patience. He could feel the walls around his heart beginning to soften, yet he knew that trust was not something to be rushed. Each shared task, each conversation, Each quiet evening by the fire was a step toward something more. And with every step, the connection between them grew stronger, more reliable, and more meaningful. One evening, as the sky blushed with the colors of sunset, Daniel and Ayanna sat on the porch, drinking tea and watching the valley below. A gentle silence settled between them, comfortable and unforced. Daniel realized how much he had come to depend on her presence, not out of need, but out of desire, a longing for companionship that was both simple and profound. He felt gratitude, not only for her help with the ranch, but for the warmth, understanding, and perspective she brought into his life. By the end of this third week, it was clear that their connection had deepened beyond mere friendship or convenience. They were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other in work, sharing knowledge and skills, and offering emotional sustenance. Daniel felt a joy he had not known since before his years of solitude, a sense of hope and possibility that he had thought lost forever. The ranch, once a place of isolation and quiet struggle, had become a space of life, partnership, and shared purpose. Through shared effort, conversation, and quiet companionship, Daniel and Ayanna discovered something rare, a connection that was steady, enduring, and enriching. It was not dramatic or forced. It was natural, growing from shared experience and mutual respect. Daniel realized that the ranch, which had been a refuge from the world, had now become a place of growth, both for the land and for his own heart. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope, not for fleeting comfort but for lasting companionship, for the possibility that two hearts could meet and create something meaningful in the vast, untamed world around them. Weeks passed, and the bond between Daniel and Ayanna grew stronger with every shared task and quiet moment. The ranch, once silent and empty, was now alive with laughter, conversation, and the comforting rhythm of two lives intertwining. Yet, even as their connection deepened, challenges began to emerge, subtle at first, then more noticeable. Daniel's years of solitude had built habits, fears, and walls around his heart that were not easy to dismantle. And while Ayanna's presence brought warmth and companionship, it also stirred uncertainties both in him and in her. One morning, Daniel noticed Ayanna looking thoughtful, her eyes distant as she tended to the horses. "Is something troubling you?" he asked gently. She paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about my life, my people, and about what it means to stay here. I am grateful for your kindness, Daniel, truly, but I wonder if I belong in one place so far from my home." Her words, though soft, struck Daniel like a sudden gust of wind. He had hoped their companionship could become permanent, yet the reminder of her past and her own freedom made him realize that trust and love required space as well as closeness. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding her concern. "I never want to hold you here if your heart calls elsewhere," he said. "I only want you to be safe and happy, whether it's here with me or wherever your journey leads." Ayanna smiled faintly, appreciating his honesty. "Thank you," she replied. "I need time to think." It was a delicate balance, trust, love, and personal freedom, and Daniel realized that the deeper connection he hoped for would not come without effort, patience, and understanding. The days that followed were filled with both joy and tension. Ayanna continued to work alongside Daniel, tending the animals, repairing fences, and helping with meals. Their routines brought comfort, yet there were moments of silence where uncertainty hovered. Daniel found himself reflecting on his own feelings, how much he desired her presence, how vulnerable he had become after years of isolation, and how the fear of loss had always been a companion in his life. He realized that letting someone in fully meant confronting not only the joy of connection, but also the risk of pain. One afternoon, a minor accident shook the fragile balance of their life together. While repairing a section of fence near the creek, Ayanna slipped on a wet rock and fell, scraping her arm and twisting her ankle. Daniel rushed to her side, helping her up and guiding her back to the cabin. The concern in his eyes was immediate, genuine, and unguarded. "I'm fine," she insisted, wincing slightly. But Daniel would not be reassured so easily. He cleaned her wounds, bandaged her arm, and supported her as she moved, his hands steady and caring. The accident, though minor, revealed the depth of his feelings for her, how much her safety, comfort, and presence mattered to him. During the evening that followed, as Ayanna rested by the fire, Daniel found himself opening up in ways he had not in years. He spoke of his past, of the losses that had driven him to solitude, of the loneliness that had shaped him, and of the hope he now felt in her presence. Ayanna listened, offering empathy and understanding, without judgment or interruption. Her response was not just comforting, it was transformative. Daniel realized that this woman, who had entered his life unexpectedly, had become a mirror to his own heart, reflecting both vulnerability and resilience. Yet challenges continued to arise, not just from emotions but from the harshness of the land. A sudden storm struck the valley, bringing heavy rain, strong winds, and the threat of flooding near the creek. Together, they worked tirelessly to secure the animals, reinforce fences, and protect the cabin. The storm tested not only their physical endurance, but also their emotional connection. Daniel noticed how Ayanna's determination and calm presence inspired him, just as his knowledge and strength reassured her. In facing adversity together, their bond deepened, proving that trust was built not only in quiet moments but also in shared struggles. During these intense days, small disagreements also surfaced. Daniel, accustomed to doing everything on his own, sometimes struggled to ask for help or accept input. Ayanna, independent and confident in her abilities, occasionally chafed at his hesitance or his attempts to shield her from tasks she was capable of handling. These moments, though minor, required patience, communication, and compromise. Each disagreement became a lesson in understanding and empathy, teaching them that love and partnership required not only warmth and trust, but also flexibility, respect, and shared responsibility. Amid the challenges, moments of tenderness offered relief and reassurance. One evening, after the storm had passed, they sat together outside, watching the sun set over the hills. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink, reflecting in the creek as it meandered through the valley. Daniel reached for Ayanna's hand, a simple gesture of comfort and connection. She held it, a quiet acknowledgement of the trust and warmth that had grown between them. They spoke little, letting the beauty of the land and the safety of each other's presence convey what words could not. In that silence, Daniel realized that love was not always spoken. It was lived, experienced, and felt in small, deliberate actions. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel and Ayanna continued to face both physical and emotional challenges. The harsh demands of the ranch, combined with their efforts to understand and support each other, created a deepening sense of partnership. Daniel marveled at Ayanna's resilience, her ability to balance strength with gentleness, and her unwavering respect for both the land and him. He, in turn, offered guidance, protection, and care, not as an obligation but as a choice, a desire to share his life and his world with someone who had become indispensable to him. One afternoon they came across a lost calf, separated from the herd and struggling in the tall grass. Ayanna spotted it first, her sharp eyes noticing its distress. Together, they guided the calf back to the group, carefully ensuring it was unharmed. The shared effort, the coordination, and the concern for another living being became a symbol of their growing connection. They realized that partnership was not just about survival or companionship. It was about working together, sharing responsibility, and caring for the world around them. The evenings continued to be a mixture of reflection, conversation, and quiet intimacy. They shared meals by the fire, cooked together, and sometimes simply sat side by side, listening to the wind in the trees or the soft calls of nocturnal animals. Daniel noticed how much lighter his heart felt, how his laughter came more easily, and how he looked forward to the presence of another human being who understood him in ways no one else had. Yana, too, found solace in his steadiness, his quiet wisdom, and the way he welcomed her without demanding change or compromising her independence. Despite the deepening bond, Daniel remained mindful of the fragility of trust and connection. He knew that the past had shaped both of them, leaving scars and fears that would not vanish overnight. There were moments of doubt, times when he questioned whether their companionship could withstand the challenges of life on the ranch, the pull of Ayana's past, and the realities of human emotion. Yet each challenge, each moment of hesitation, became an opportunity to strengthen their understanding, communicate more openly, and reinforce the trust that had begun to blossom between them. One night during a particularly clear evening, they stepped outside to watch the stars. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, a river of light in the vast desert expanse. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years of solitude lift slightly. He glanced at Ayana, noticing the way the starlight reflected in her eyes, the calm confidence in her posture, and the subtle warmth that had grown between them. He realized that their connection was no longer tentative. It had become a steady presence in both of their lives, a source of strength, comfort, and hope. As the night wore on, they returned to the cabin, feeling the reassurance of shared space and quiet companionship. Daniel reflected on how far they had come, from a single, cautious encounter to the deep, trusting partnership that now defined their days. Yana's presence had transformed the ranch, not just in the work they accomplished together, but in the emotional life that had been missing for so long. The walls around his heart, though not completely gone, were softened by trust, care, and the realization that vulnerability could coexist with strength. Through challenges, accidents, storms, and disagreements, Daniel and Ayana had discovered the essence of partnership. It was not a perfect, effortless connection, but one built through patience, communication, shared work, and mutual respect. They had faced adversity together and emerged stronger, understanding that love and companionship required effort, understanding, and the willingness to confront both joy and fear. By the end of this fourth part of their journey, Daniel understood something profound. True connection is not found in ease alone, but in navigating difficulties side by side, in offering and accepting help, and in embracing both the vulnerability and strength that come with letting someone truly into one's life. Yana had not only brought warmth to his home and heart, but had also challenged him to grow, to trust, and to envision a life that was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than he had dared to imagine in his years of solitude. Spring had returned to the valley, and with it came a sense of renewal on the ranch. The hills were alive with green grass, wildflowers painted the fields in bright colors, and the creek flowed steadily, reflecting the sunlight like scattered diamonds. For Daniel, the ranch had never looked so vibrant. But the real transformation was not only in the land. It was in him, in Ayana, and in the life they had begun to build together. The 8 years of solitude that had defined his existence felt like a distant memory, replaced by the warmth and companionship that now filled his days. Daniel rose early, as he always did, but this morning was different. He felt a sense of anticipation he could not explain. The air was crisp, the birds singing their morning songs, and the ranch seemed to hum with life. Yana was already outside, tending to the horses with her usual quiet efficiency, her movements graceful and assured. Daniel watched her for a moment, feeling gratitude and affection well up inside him. He realized that the joy he now felt was not just about the routines of work or the beauty of the land. It was about sharing life with someone who had become essential to his happiness. Breakfast was a lively affair. They cooked together, sharing smiles and playful conversation. Yana had learned some of Daniel's favorite dishes, while he had tried to appreciate the flavors of her traditional meals. The kitchen, once a place of solitary preparation, had become a space of laughter, shared effort, and connection. Daniel noticed how their teamwork extended beyond cooking. Each gesture, from passing a bowl to setting the table, was an expression of care, an unspoken acknowledgement of the partnership they had cultivated over the weeks and months. After breakfast, they moved to the fields. The morning sun warmed the valley and the ranch was alive with activity. Together, they mended fences, guided the cattle, and tended the horses. The work was challenging, yet it was also a source of joy. Daniel felt a deep sense of pride, not just in the ranch itself, but in the life they were creating together. Yana's presence had transformed ordinary tasks into shared experiences filled with laughter, learning, and quiet moments of appreciation. The bond between them had grown strong, rooted in trust, effort, and mutual respect. Even as their days were filled with routine, there were moments that reminded Daniel of the depth of their connection. One afternoon, while checking the herd, a young calf stumbled and nearly fell into the creek. Yana reacted instinctively, reaching out to steady the animal. Daniel's heart leapt, not just for the calf's safety, but for the tenderness and decisiveness she showed. He realized that her courage, care, and presence had become a constant source of comfort and admiration. In that moment, he understood that love was not always grand gestures. Sometimes it was quiet acts of attention and protection, small moments that built a life together. Evenings were now a time for reflection and connection. As the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky with brilliant hues of orange, pink, and purple, they would sit by the fire, sharing stories, dreams, and hopes for the future. Daniel spoke of the years he had spent in solitude, of the longing he had suppressed, and of the joy he now felt in Ayana's presence. Ayana, in turn, shared her own reflections, her journey, her hopes, and her gratitude for the life they were shaping together. These conversations, full of honesty and warmth, deepened their bond, reinforcing the trust and love that had grown over months of shared life. There were times when the past would resurface. Daniel would catch himself remembering the losses that had driven him to isolation, and Ayana would recall the challenges and hardships of her own life. Yet, rather than creating distance, these memories became a source of connection. They shared their vulnerabilities openly, offering understanding, empathy, and reassurance. Each revelation, each moment of honesty, strengthened the foundation of their relationship, proving that love could flourish even after pain and solitude. One spring morning, Daniel decided to take Ayana to a favorite spot he had rarely visited, the top of a ridge overlooking the valley. The climb was steady but manageable, and the view at the top was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched as far as the eye could see, the creek winding like a silver ribbon through the green fields, and the sky endless and wide. Daniel felt a surge of emotion, turning to Ayana with a smile. "I wanted you to see this," he said softly. "This is where I often come when I need to think, to remember, or to dream." Ayana's eyes sparkled as she looked at the panorama, then at him. "It's beautiful," she said, "and I can see why this place means so much to you. Thank you for sharing it with me." They sat together on the ridge, watching the wind ripple through the grass, listening to the distant sounds of the ranch, and feeling the sun warm their faces. Daniel felt a courage he had not known in years, a willingness to be open and vulnerable. He reached for Ayana's hand, holding it gently, and she responded with a soft squeeze. In that quiet moment, words were unnecessary. Their connection, built over weeks of shared work, conversation, and trust, was evident in the simple gesture of holding hands, in the comfort of proximity, and in the shared understanding that they had found something rare and precious in each other. The days continued, filled with shared effort and growing intimacy. They worked side by side, cooked together, repaired fences, and cared for the animals. Yet there was also room for quiet reflection, for playful moments, and for tender gestures. Daniel noticed how naturally they had come to rely on each other, not out of necessity alone, but out of desire, affection, and respect. He realized that he no longer feared solitude because he had learned to share his life fully, without losing himself. Gianna had become a part of his world, not as an intruder or a temporary visitor, but as a companion, a partner, and a source of warmth and joy. One evening, a gentle breeze swept through the valley, carrying the scents of wildflowers and fresh grass. Daniel and Ayana sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens, a river of light in the vast desert. Daniel felt a profound sense of peace and contentment. The ranch, once a place of isolation and routine, had become a sanctuary of life, connection, and love. Iana's presence had transformed it, as well as him, filling spaces he had long thought empty and unreachable. In these quiet moments, Daniel understood the full extent of what they had built together. Love, he realized, was not about grand declarations or dramatic gestures. It was about trust, patience, and shared experience. It was about showing up every day, offering care, listening, and being present. It was about celebrating joys, facing challenges together, and allowing vulnerability to coexist with strength. He looked at Ayana, her face illuminated by the glow of the fire and the soft light of the stars, and knew that he had found something enduring, a connection that would sustain them both through the years to come. Spring turned into early summer, and with it came the richness of life on the ranch. The fields were lush, the animals healthy, and the routines they had established flowed with ease and enjoyment. Daniel and Ayana had become a seamless team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other through weaknesses. The small challenges they faced, storms, accidents, or disagreements, were now handled with mutual respect and cooperation, strengthening their partnership. Their lives were intertwined, not in dependence, but in a shared commitment to care, nurture, and grow together. One morning, Daniel found Ayana tending to the garden near the cabin, her hands covered in soil, a look of concentration on her face. He watched her for a moment, feeling a swell of gratitude and love. "You've done amazing things here," he said softly. Ayana looked up, smiling. "I've learned from the land and from you," she replied. "You've shown me patience, care, and how to truly live in harmony with this place." Daniel felt a warmth in his chest, realizing that their bond had become a source of strength for both of them, a shared foundation built on respect, trust, and love. The seasons continued to change, and with each passing day, Daniel and Ayana's relationship deepened. They faced challenges together, celebrated successes, and shared moments of quiet reflection. The ranch, once a solitary refuge, had become a home in the truest sense, a place filled with life, warmth, and shared purpose. Daniel understood that the years of solitude had prepared him for this moment, teaching him patience, resilience, and the value of connection. Gianna had brought not only companionship, but also a renewed sense of hope, joy, and meaning to his life. One evening, as the sun set over the valley in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Daniel and Ayana sat by the fire, hands intertwined, hearts open to one another. The ranch was quiet except for the gentle crackle of flames and the soft sounds of nature. Daniel looked at Ayana and spoke from his heart. "I never imagined that life could feel this full, this warm, and this alive. You've brought so much into my world, more than I could have ever hoped for." Ayana leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you've given me a home, a place where I can be myself, where I am valued and loved. Together, we've built something real, something lasting." In that moment, Daniel understood fully what he had been seeking for so many years. The ranch, the land, the animals, they had given him purpose, discipline, and solitude. But Ayana had brought love, warmth, and companionship, transforming his life in ways that words could scarcely capture. 8 years of isolation had prepared him to appreciate this connection, to recognize its value, and to embrace it without fear. They sat together in silence, hearts aligned, feeling the peace, trust, and love that had grown between them, knowing that they had found not only each other but also a shared life filled with meaning and joy.